Hello Year 10, it's Mr. Godman here, and I'm going to be taking your lesson today. And I'm really looking forward to teaching you about a really exciting moment in the Cold War. Today we're going to look at the consequences of the Truman Doctrine. So first, I'd like you to get yourself ready for the lesson, and you're going to need your history workbook, a pen, you might need some scrap paper, and I'd like you to put away or turn off any distractions such as mobile phones and televisions. Pause now and get yourself ready, and when you are, press play again. So this half term we're going to move you forward in your study of the Cold War. The last thing you did on this was probably the breakdown of the Grand Alliance, and so your do now task today is all about that. You have 5 quiz questions to do here, and I'd like you to pause the video and try to answer them from memory without your notes. Remember, this is one of the ways that we try to improve our memories. So pause now, and when you're done, press play. Okay, so well done on your do now, and here are the answers. I'd like you to pause the video and mark your own. If you get one wrong, can you write the correct answer into your workbook, perhaps in a different colour pen? And don't forget to give yourself a score out of 5 for how many you got correct. So today's lesson title is What were the consequences of the Truman Doctrine? We're going to look at why Truman issued the Truman Doctrine in March of 1947. We'll have a little look at what Truman said in it, and we'll touch on the consequences or results of the Truman Doctrine as well. Now it's time to update your knowledge organiser, and you have a copy of this in your workbook. Today we're going to be working on theme 2, the development of the Cold War. We're going to look at event number 14, the Truman Doctrine, and so we will touch on keyword 6, doctrine, a set of political, economic or military beliefs. The key individual today is going to be Truman. He's number 4 on your list, and we'll look at one of our key concepts, containment. You might want to pause now and finish highlighting your knowledge organiser. Press play when you're ready to move forward. Now it's time for your starter. This is activity 1.2 in your workbook. And today it's a big question. By the start of 1947, President Truman's attitude towards the Soviet Union was getting tougher. What made him so determined to stand up to the Soviet Union? You'll need to think hard to everything we've done in class on this. If you need to, you could take a look at your knowledge organisers, and I'm going to put up a few more clues or hints to help you. If you don't want to see those yet, then pause now. Here are some hints to get you thinking, and I'd like you to pause and write any ideas which you can come up with in your workbook. So let's have a look at some good answers to this question. Stalin did not withdraw his Red Army from Eastern Europe at the end of World War II. The Red Army was a huge military force, and it looked very threatening to the West. Stalin also set up communist satellite states in Eastern Europe. That looked like he was trying to spread communism worldwide, which worried Truman. Truman also had an atomic bomb, which gave the USA a military advantage over the Soviet Union and increased Truman's confidence in standing up to Stalin. Don't forget, the American ambassador in Moscow, George Kennan, wrote the long telegram to Truman advising him to stand up to Stalin. And lastly, in his Iron Curtain speech, Winston Churchill encouraged Truman and other American politicians of his generation to take a tougher stand against the USSR. Now I'd like you to pause the video and write down one of these ideas which you missed. It's time now for us to introduce some new knowledge. Now, over the next half term, we're going to be looking at the development of the Cold War between 1947 and 1949. And as you can see, there are 6 big moments or key events which we're going to look at. The first of them is the Truman Doctrine. So let's look at some background to the Truman Doctrine. After the Potsdam Conference in July 1945, the USA became less involved in the affairs of Europe. At the end of World War II, American soldiers began to return home from the fighting in Europe back to the USA, and you can see this ship loaded with American soldiers going home. Now, many Americans were pleased to get their boys back home from Europe after such a terrible war. And many American politicians and members of the public wanted America to go back to its traditional policy of isolationism. That means staying apart from other countries, not getting involved in their affairs, not getting involved in their wars. But President Truman did not share this view. He wanted the USA to play a leading role in the world. So in March 1947, he announced this in a speech to the US Congress. The ideas in his speech became known as the Truman Doctrine, and it's very, very important for us because it's a real turning point in the early Cold War. The Truman Doctrine and the ideas in it shaped US policy for the next 25 years. So why did Truman announce his Truman Doctrine in March 1947? Well, the long-term causes are these. Firstly, the Soviet Union was beginning to tighten its control over Eastern Europe, setting up satellite states with communist governments under the control of Moscow. Truman was worried that the Soviet Union was trying to spread communism through Europe. And don't forget, in his long telegram, the American ambassador in Moscow, George Kennan, advised Truman to take a tough stand against the USSR. So these are the long-term causes. But the trigger which made Truman announce his Truman Doctrine was connected with events in Greece. Now you can see from my map here the location of Greece, and I want you to notice that it's right on the border of the Soviet Union's satellite states. There was a civil war going on in Greece at this time between the Greek government and communist rebels who were trying to overthrow it. Britain was helping the Greek government against the rebels, but in 1947, Britain announced that it could not afford to support the Greek government anymore. Truman feared that Greece would fall to communism, and that this would be followed next by Turkey turning communist as well. So let's look a little closer at what was actually in the Truman Doctrine. There were 4 big ideas. The first idea was American leadership. Truman said that the USA should take responsibility for protecting and defending democracy around the world. The second big idea was anti-communism. Truman accused the communists of trying to force their evil ideology on free people around the world, and he used very tough language to do this. The third big idea was Truman's policy of containment. He said that the USA should try to contain communism or stop it from spreading. Fourthly, Truman set out the idea of intervention. He said that instead of being isolationist, the USA should get much more involved in world affairs. In fact, he said that the USA should intervene directly to offer aid to countries which were at risk of falling to communism, including Greece and Turkey. Now, this Truman Doctrine was a turning point in the Cold War. As I said previously, it shaped American policy for the next 25 years, and it had some very important immediate consequences. Firstly, Truman provided financial aid to Greece, and that helped the Greek government to defeat the communists. Greece remained a democratic country. It did not become another satellite state under Soviet control. Secondly, the tough language used in the Truman Doctrine increased superpower rivalry. The way that Truman described communism made it clear to Stalin that the Grand Alliance was now well and truly over, and that America viewed the Soviet Union as a rival. Thirdly, as a result of the Truman Doctrine, the USA became much more involved in the affairs of Europe. Now, we're going to look at that a little bit more in coming lessons, particularly when we look at the Marshall Plan and we look at American rivalry with the Soviet Union over the issue of Germany and Berlin. So we're going to come back to that in the next few lessons. So you're ready now to do activity 1.3 in your workbook. Now, before you attempt to do this, it's really important that you read first, and you've got some reading materials to complete. Then, I want you to define 3 key terms in your own words. I'd like you to explain what triggered Truman to issue the Truman Doctrine in 1947. Think about the events in Greece. And then I want you to fill in this table showing the consequences or results of the Truman Doctrine. And there are 3 columns here. I'd like you to think about the results for the USA, the results for the USSR, and the results for superpower relations. Well done on our lesson today. Now, if you'd like to take this further, you could do activity 1.4. You could carry out some research on the Truman Doctrine. If you Google it, you'll find the whole text of the doctrine is available on the internet. You could choose 3 quotes from it which you think are really important, write them down and explain why you chose them. Now you could start by watching the video on our YouTube channel. You can see the link here. I'll also pop the link up for you in a moment. So if you do want to watch that video, there's a direct link to it here. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you know when new videos are published, and you can do that by clicking the icon here. I look forward to teaching you next lesson when we'll be looking at the Marshall Plan.